order the August 12th, 2024 meeting of the East Penn School District Board of School Directors. Will you all please rise in following the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, it's my understanding there are no requests to comment, so we'll move on to the next item, which is the approval of minutes for the July 8th meeting. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Ms. Ford?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Klotz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye. Thank you, Ms. Allen. Moving on, we'll move on to the district update. Dr. Campbell.
Yes, this is a reminder for our entire school community that the first day of school is Monday, August 26th, and I know all our kids are at home jumping up and down. Please, I encourage families to check out our school websites. We have a lot of exciting new student orientations, meet the teacher, open house events, and other great opportunities to welcome families to each of our school communities. So I encourage families to check out school websites for those dates and times. Also, a few general announcements about the start of the year. Elementary teacher assignment letters were mailed home to students the week of August 5th, so they should have arrived, and there should have been a lot of excitement in our elementary homes last week. Secondary course schedules will be available in Power School on August 19th. And our bus assignment letters from STA will be mailed out the week of August 19th. So next week, families should be receiving bus assignment information and plenty of time for the first day of school. If you have any questions about bus assignments, you can contact STA directly. Also, a reminder for the upcoming school year, we are replacing what was formerly our former yellow emergency contact information cards that we asked families to complete via paper. That is now an electronic process. It's our online returning student form. East Penn families who have been in the district should have received a link with instructions specific for each child here in the district on how it's a very easy process to complete. We ask that if you've not completed the online returning student form yet, that you do that by the end of this week. And if families need any support in that process, they simply have to reach out to their building principal. We do have several positions that are available in the district, and so I encourage community members who might be looking for some part-time work to check out those positions that we have available. In particular, we have several support staff positions if we have any individuals who might be interested in working in buildings with our kids. We certainly have positions available there. We also have some crossing guard positions for our school community in Lincoln and Jefferson. So I encourage anyone who might be looking for some part-time work to consider being part of the East Penn team. And then a few final announcements for the summer. Our summer supplemental feeding program that's available to families in the East Penn community continues to be available. That's sponsored by our partnership with Emmaus Rotary and several other service organizations in the community. Distribution is every Wednesday here at Emmaus High School from 10:30 to 12, and every Wednesday at Lower Macungie Middle School from 11:30 to 1. And so we will do a reminder once the school year starts in terms of that distribution program, but it is continuing for the remainder of the summer. And then just an all call to our East Penn senior citizens in our community. Our registration is open for our new community education program, and so we encourage our community members to check out on our district website the classes that are available, and they start September 9th. And then finally, our East Penn Education Foundation is beginning registration for our 4th annual golf outing. It's held at Brookside Country Club on Monday, September 30th. A great way to have fun with a wonderful morning of golf, and It's a great fundraiser for our East Penn Education Foundation, which has sponsored many, many programs in the STEM fields for the students in the East Penn School District. So please check out information regarding that upcoming golf outing. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, school starts soon. Very excited. Okay, next on the agenda, it's hard to believe another year has gone by. We have another update from Communities and Schools. Dr. Campbell, would you like to introduce?
Yeah, I'll do just a brief introduction as members of our team come up. I want to just start off by saying that many members of our school board as well as our community are likely aware that since 2017, East Penn has been fortunate to have a partnership with Communities and Schools, and we have a Communities and Schools site coordinator at some of our secondary schools. And this evening, we have Ms. Jen Carolla, who's our Director of Educational Alternatives, and Mrs. Wendy Seifert, who's the Vice President of Operations from Communities and Schools. She's a friendly face. She's been here with us before. And the purpose of tonight's presentation is informational. And so they are going to share an overview of how Communities and Schools has positively impacted the lives of some of our students here in East Penn at our secondary schools. They're going to report on some of the national data that they collect as part of Communities and Schools and attempt to bring that down to the very local level. And again, tonight is not about action. Tonight is about information and hearing the great outcomes of the program. And then the board will take action on the updated Communities and Schools contract at a future board meeting, specifically at our next meeting in August. So tonight's really informational. Special thanks to Mrs. Seifert and Ms. Carolla for being here. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Jen Carolla.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Good evening. I am once again excited to be here to introduce Communities and Schools, and the annual update is presented by Wendy Seifert, the Vice President of Operations for Communities and Schools. This presentation is really an acknowledgement of the investment and the incredibly hard work that our site coordinators, Ms. Kristen Hackman at Eyre Middle School and Ms. Amy Williams at the high school, as well as the entire CIS team, really consistently do and contribute to our district on a daily basis. Our partnership with Communities and Schools dates back to the 2017-2018 school year, where we welcomed our first site coordinator to Emmaus High School. And not too long after, in the year 2019, we welcomed site coordinators to our middle schools. So we do have a bit of a history with Communities and Schools. Tonight, Wendy will provide an overview of Communities and Schools and also dig a little further into our annual data from the 23-24 school year. And in order to set the stage and give you some context to that and to the work that our site coordinators are doing on a regular basis in our buildings, I wanted to start by sharing some initial social emotional building data from the high school and Eyre Middle School. On this first graph here that you see in front of you, you will see instances of social emotional intervention as documented by our school counselors and our school psychologists at the high school for the 23-24 school year. You'll note that the previous school year, 23-24, is designated by the neon green columns there. This is representative of 345 documented cases from high school students. It is important to note that the presenting concerns you see across the bottom are not indicative of individual students. So for instance, a student who presents with a concern may present with multiple concerns when they come to see the school counselor or psychologist. So I just want to draw attention to that, because if anybody's adding up the numbers, it will exceed the number 345 students, but there were 345 individual instances of reports. As you look at this data, you will note areas with significant decreases in numbers from the previous school year. In particular, I'd like to highlight the areas of suicide ideation and self-harm. At the high school, we saw significant decreases in those two particular areas. While I don't believe there's ever room for celebration until we hit zero or negative numbers in those areas, I do think it's important to highlight some of the growth that we're making in working with students who are presenting with a multitude of concerns. And I think it's important to note here that it's very tricky to ascertain exactly why we might see dips in the trends of some of these presenting concerns as you look across the graph. But I do believe, in part, we can attribute that to the continued increase in supports and diversified supports that we are bringing into our buildings. We are also employing a lot of preventative strategies in the hopes of negating some of the presenting concerns that you see here in front of you. That said, after a more thorough review of our data collection this year, we did identify as a student services group that there is some room for improvement in terms of the way that we collect data and the mechanism and the process in which we're doing it. And so we are planning in this upcoming school year to use a different reporting system to collect information of instances where our school counselors, psychologists, and other mental health professionals on our staff are working with individual students. Similarly, as you look at the graph showing IR's mental health instances and presenting concerns, you will note here, again, we see no increases with the exception, I believe, of perhaps one, which is the eating disorder. It was the only category that showed any growth here. I do want to celebrate the fact that these numbers are going down. IR reported 63 documented interventions this year, and again, it could be multiple presenting concerns in any given instance. Where we continue to see frequency of reports from students, and actually it was very similar in the initial graph that I showed you at the high school, anxiety continues to be up there, as well as family and relationship issues between both of those schools. Suicide ideation and self-harm did decrease, not as significantly as we saw in the high school, but we will certainly take any trend down in those two particular categories that we are seeing. I do want to highlight as well, as we talked about these numbers decreasing, we also had a decrease in the number of reported cases between last year and this year. So just to call those numbers out, this current year at IR, we had 63 documented interventions, which is indicative of this graph. In the previous year, we had 182. And then on the previous slide at the high school, we had 345, if you recall I mentioned, and that is down from 512 in the previous school year. So as we digest that data, I think it's important to understand the supports that I referenced and what we've been adding and what we have in place currently to assist students, and in particular, assist students in that perspective of the social, emotional, behavioral realm of MTSS. So as a reminder, I know that this triangle is familiar to most everyone in this room, if not everyone in this room, but this is a reference for our multi-tiered system of supports, our MTSS model. And this is really designed to identify students who may be struggling and to be able to intervene earlier with those students. So what you're looking at here is a reflection of a high-level overview reflection of the supports that we have in place through East Penn to support students, again, in that behavioral, social, emotional realm. Wendy's going to talk about how CIS really hits each of these targeted tiers of interventions. And so as you look at it, you see CIS that's pulled to the side. Our site coordinators are working at the tier 1 level, which is really touching every student in the building. They are also doing tier 2 work as well as tier 3 work. And so with the MTSS model, it's always core plus more. So students that need additional levels of support always receive core plus additional targeted intervention with more intensity and frequency. And no student necessarily lives in any of these categories. It is very fluid and students go up and down the triangle, but the goal obviously is to keep the largest percentage of our students, upwards around 80%, receiving and thriving in that core tier 1 level. So with that, I will turn it over to Wendy to talk more in detail about that work that they're doing.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. As I've been introduced, my name is Wendy Seifert. I'm the Vice President of Operations for CIS. I was trying to do the math on my way here, and thank you, Dr. Campbell, for doing it, because I couldn't remember how many years it was. So for those who aren't familiar, Communities in Schools is a local affiliated national nonprofit agency serving approximately 1.8 million students annually across the country in 26 states and the District of Columbia. We support students with non-academic barriers and obstacles in order to help facilitate their academic success. And our mission is to surround students with a community of support, empowering them to stay in school and achieve in life. We have a philosophy that every child needs and deserves. 5 key things, we call them the 5 basics. And at the very top is a one-on-one relationship with a caring adult, a safe place to learn and grow, a healthy start and a healthy future, a marketable skill to use upon graduation, and a chance to give back to peers and communities. We call these our founding basics, and they drive all of our work. Here in East Penn, since 2017, we've been implementing our evidence-based model of integrated student supports. On the slideshow is a pictograph of the model, but it is core at the essential is putting a site coordinator co-located in the 2 buildings we've been talking about this evening, who work collaboratively with the building leaders and teams to identify what the needs are of the school, to understand where there are perhaps gaps in services, and how we can potentially fill those gaps and help the school drive their goals for the year around things like family engagement and climate and academics. Annually, we do that needs assessment. We create a plan with the school leadership and the team, and that plan includes 3 tiers of support, similar to what Ms. Corolla was talking about. Tier 1 supports being available to the whole school, and Tier 2 and 3 supports provided to case-managed students in small group and individual basis. We monitor and adjust our work to understand if it's having the impact we hope to have. We do that at a school-wide level and an individual student level for our case-managed students. And at the end of the year, we evaluate to say, were we successful at what we set out to do? And if not, what can we do differently? Are there new and emerging needs that we hadn't thought about in the past? And we start that process all over again in the summer to, again, do that needs assessment. It's a continuous improvement model of service. So for the purposes of your information tonight, I want to share with you a little bit about the school-wide goals that the high school and I are set out to achieve. And so we'll go these at a school-wide level, and then we'll show you some information at the student level. So our first school-wide goal at Emmaus High School was improve the attendance percentage from 91.7 to 93. And we made progress of that goal at the end of the year. We were able to reach 92.25%. You can see there listed some initiatives that our staff did. Some Tier 1 supports were the Hornet Homeroom Monthly Attendance Challenge. We did a quarterly attendance challenge, and we did outreach to students who were missing significant amounts of days with We Miss You postcards. We worked with Center for Music Change and Project Connect to connect students with mentoring programs. And we also individualized case-managed students and did attendance charting and check and connect and all of those things that individual students were in need of related to individual needs. The second school-wide goal was around school climate. We were attempting to increase the percentage of students who feel a sense of belonging. You can see there also the school-wide small group and individual student interventions that were associated with this goal. And we made progress to 68% of our students feeling that. I will share that this is the 68% to 68% is a progress from spring to spring. So we identified it as making progress because our baseline was 68 from the previous spring. When they did it in the fall, they actually saw a decline. And then at the spring, it went back up to 68%. So we measured that as progress because we did see a decline in the fall, but it went back up in the spring. So if you're wondering why that was identified as made progress there. And then the other last school-wide goal was to increase the number of students who are receiving SEL supports. And we had a goal of reaching 215. We ultimately were able to reach 204, approximately about a 7% increase in students receiving the supports. You can see the school-wide initiatives there in emotional regulation and problem solving. Significant amount of small group interventions with some of our partners. These were not all delivered by our site coordinators, although they are fantastic at their work. We actually work better when we can collaborate with other partners who are doing this work, and we serve as the coordinator of the support, where the services from those external partners are accessible, coordinated, and accountable. And then along with the individual student supports is the case management for the one-on-one check-ins with students as well. Overall, at Emmaus High School, you'll see our progress for students who were case managed. 79% made progress on their academic goals. 47% made progress on attendance. They did not have any students with behavior goals this past year. SEL goals were met at 86%, and college and career readiness were made at 100. I do want to, explain the 47%. I think eyes are sometimes drawn to the lower numbers. But after looking at the data, it was a small cohort of students who had attendance goals. There was approximately 15 students who had attendance goals. And when looking at why we might have seen a decrease there, there were 4 students who had some significant issues outside of school that were really out of our control. Because it's such a small group, I don't want to go into the details, but that is a potential explanation as to why the attendance goal was not as high as we had typically seen. We also often talk about the demographics of our case managed students. So you'll see here, this is Emmaus High School's overall numbers related to referrals and students who engaged in service. Those are broken down there. Again, you might be drawn to the why did we see a decrease in referrals? And I think that is a testament to what the school has done with the MTSS process, and ensuring that students who need the support most are getting the support rather than just sending all the kids to CIS or referring them all. There's been a much more targeted approach in making sure the students who need the right supports are getting to the right provider. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that the referrals are down. I still think there's a significant need. I think it's a testament to how well the team is working to get students to a variety of resources and not just one. Eyre Middle School, I'm going to switch gears about the middle school. Our goals were to improve behavior, to reduce the number of reportable incidences. We did meet that goal. And you can see those initiatives that are connected there as well. Project Connect, smoking cessation, is a partner of ours with Care and Treatment. We've done a lot of work with kid-to-kid presentations, Arts Quest, things like that. Again, working with other partners who are out there, and we serve as a coordinator for that. School-wide goals related to Eyre, again, is in response to the Panorama survey, again, trying to increase the student's sense of belonging. We met that goal with 78% of students reporting that, again, a spring-to-spring report, or a measurement, sorry. Our site coordinator, Kristen Hackman, has become one of the dog handlers for the therapy dog at Eyre, which I wish I had that role. Working again on school resource fairs, Unity Day, kindness events, those things that, again, really lend itself to students feeling a sense of belonging. Small group initiatives were around social skills groups for our young students, as well as the case management. And their third goal was, again, to help students improve their regulation of emotions. And you can see we did identify that as made progress. Again, I think we saw a similar situation where numbers decreased in the fall and went up in the spring. We continue to have the conversation, is that the best way to measure this? We're a continuous improvement model, so we'll continue to see if it's the best way to measure it. But right now, your Panorama survey is really leading our ability to measure these types of things, so we do use it. The school-wide initiatives there, Arts Quest, Reset Focus, Mental Health Awareness. the symposium, yoga classes for students and faculty. Small groups were around wellness and character and stress management, as well as the individual case management. So again, here you'll see the outcomes for the individual case managed students, 82% towards academics, 89% making improvement in attendance, 75% making improvement in behaviors, and 88% in SEL skills. And again, you'll start to see some demographics of the students who are being case managed and the situations that are leading to our case management size, as well as those who declined service or perhaps did not respond as well. You'll see that. We talk about our work in the sense that we don't do this work alone. It really does require a community to come together and provide supports and services. And this is just a sampling of some of the partners that we worked with this year at both of our schools. The new ones are identified with an asterisk, so we're always looking for new and additional ones that we partner with. You might see Nazareth High School up there. We partnered with them for the Avidum programming, and we hosted 16 high school Avidum clubs at the high school this year. So there's some testimonials there for you to read. I don't want to read them word for word for you tonight. I hope you get a chance to look at them. But I think that both speaks to the context of the work that we're doing. We have a student testimonial as well as a counselor who were very kind in what we're in sharing our success and our work with you this evening. But one of the things we did want to talk about is stuff that doesn't show up in the data. There's a lot that goes on day to day. The numbers are good and we're happy with the progress. We can always do better. But some of those things don't always show up in the data. At Iyer Middle School, we created a mindful walk for each grade level. Our site coordinator is the Girls on the Run coach and the Kid to Kid club advisor. She's a therapy dog handler. She's supporting Summer Learning Academy with SEL programming and group. She's led yoga classes for students, faculty, and staff. We at both schools support the Angel Network and do food drives and pop-up shops to support the basic needs of our families. The creation of the mental health fair for students, as well as the district's health symposium that's been happening. We also were happy to provide a scholarship this year to a high school senior from our organization and the Chandler Barnes Foundation. As a recipient, we had a high school receive $2,500 for her post-high school expenses, whether that be for supplies or tuition or, room things for her dorm, whatever it was she needed. So we were happy to be able to give her that. We're the Avidum Club advisor at the high school, where Amy Williams actually received an award from our agency as the innovative project. So she was recognized by her peers for that work that she's been doing with the Avidum Club, and hosted the Avidum Talk workshops, like I mentioned, 16 school districts attending in collaboration with the IU Project Aware to really address the prevention of suicide. Is really the foundation of that work. And the My Ascension was also a suicide prevention family engagement event where the documentary on a student surviving a suicide attempt and her personal story and journey followed up with a panel that was facilitated by our staff. So it doesn't always show up in the data, but there's some, really great highlights and hard work that's happening. And I hope is a correlation to the data that Ms. Carolla shared of how hard we're trying to bring those numbers down to support your students and families. So, any questions?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the analysis and information provided in the presentation, and certainly, and this goes along with everything we've seen over the last several years with you. Appreciate the partnership and the contributions that you're making to student support, mental health, and overall well-being. With that, I'd like to open up to questions for the board. Ms. Bowman?
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really helpful to hear about the many different ways communities and schools are helping our students succeed. My first question, I think, is for Dr. Carolla. in slides, I think it's 2 and 3, we had the mental health data for the high school and for IRE. And I know we don't have LMMS on here because we don't have communities and schools in LMMS, but from a board perspective, it'd be helpful to see that comparative data. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before where we didn't have any coordinator in that school. And if it was last year, you almost have like a natural study going on to see how communities and schools is making an impact versus when that model is absent from a school, so it'd be helpful to see.
Yes, I can tell you, I did dig into the data prior to this presentation, and it is quite comparable. And if you do recall, we did hire a student supports coordinator, which is obviously not identical to the site coordinator at communities and schools, but mirrors and aligns with a lot of the work that they are doing. So in terms of a comparison, there are great similarities between the two middle schools, even though different entities are providing the services.
Okay, that it would just be helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And then my only other question, I think it's page 8 on the attendance. Is that new? I don't know. Yeah, okay, so it's the slide 8. And you had mentioned that some of the factors that were beyond your control, and I don't need to hear the details on those, but what I'm curious is, if you dig into all of these factors, like, how do I ask this question so you don't have to talk about individual students? But are there things that you're learning from working with students that can help the schools offer additional supports to help improve our attendance? Like some of these, I understand that some of these situations are really complex.
Yeah, attendance is certainly a complex issue. I think some of the root causes that we run into are family-based situations that are could potentially be around medical issues where it's difficult for us to have a student come into the building. There was some issues with students going to and from charter or, and or cyber, which was impacting things as well. And, you know, really trying to connect those families to resources, even though they're not in the building, is a challenge. But those are the primary things that we continue to try to address, even when a student is not in front of us in a building.
Yeah, it would just be helpful to know if there's other supports that we need to capture these students who are really struggling to get to school for whatever reason, whether it's a family hardship or a medical issue. Is there something else that we could be putting in place to help them?
If I had my wish list, door-to-door transportation and, therapists who are readily available when students and families, there's still a shortage in our community of therapists. Okay. Unfortunately, we're seeing that all over the valley. That's not unique to this community. So we do our very best with the resources we have, but there continue to be some things that, are slightly out of our control, but we keep trying.
Yeah, I understand.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowman. Mr. Smith?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate how Dr. Carolla led off with the challenges of finding causation in a hodgepodge, for lack of a better word, of different types of data, right? So I do appreciate also how you, rather than necessarily digging down to try to find the causation, said, okay, but it's happening, but here's what we're also doing in the schools at the end. And I appreciated how you painted a picture of your work in the context of what those numbers are. And so I appreciated that. And when I looked at the overall trends, obviously the positive being that everything is going down. And then when you look at the school-wide goals, you with all due respect, you're kind of like, wow, it's kind of like progress, and it's kind of, and I would encourage you to, even though I'm like, whether it's LCTI or here, I'm the guy who's always talking about like make your case, right? But I think I would encourage you to give your team some grace. And you just speak this a little bit, but when you have the triangle of our MTSS processes and where you fit into each one of the levels, and you're just one piece of a great big puzzle. And a lot of our school-wide goals, all of the ones that we talked about here, are certainly not something that you do in isolation of everybody else, right? So that panorama data that dipped in the fall and then came back in the spring, you didn't do nothing, because obviously you shared all those awesome things that you were doing, but you're certainly not alone in having to carry the weight of bringing that goal up to where you want it to be, where we all want it to be. So when I think about, I take a look at the entire presentation, it's all important to me, but when I really get down to the purpose of why you're here today and talking about what you do and how it affects kids and whether it's effective, me personally hone in on the case managed students, because those are the kids that you do have ownership over and you do have direct control of. And I appreciate how you started off by talking about the attendance piece, because that was the piece that jumped out at me. Like, I'm looking at all this positive data and I'm like, holy cow, like my original question to you is going to be, okay, if you were going to focus on one thing for next year at the high school, what would it be? And you already kind of took care of that for me. So I'm going to ask the question anyway. If you and take a look at your case managed kids and the stories that the collective story that they've given you over this past school year across both IR and MAS, I'll give you that. Where do you see our kids' biggest needs in terms of the case managed kids going forward into the 24-25 school year?
I wish I had Amy and Kristen here, because they may, and I would love to follow up with them specifically about that and that question. But what I hear them talk about the most is students' skill building in those non-academic areas. Social emotional skills, life skills, whatever you call them, is the biggest thing that they're spending their time on a daily, regular basis to help students build those resiliency skills that unfortunately not all students have these days and aren't coming to school always prepared with. So that's what I hear them talk about the most. That's what I hear trending continuously across the work that we're doing across the Lehigh Valley and beyond. And, those skills, those resiliency skills, those life skills will actually serve a student better in the long run than, more math. I love math, don't get me wrong, but we have to have those students prepared and able to manage everything that life's going to throw at them. So I hear them talk about those social emotional life skills, resiliency skills.
And I think what you just said, that touches on a little bit of each one of those 5 areas, from the academic, attendance, behavior, SEL, and the college career readiness. So if there's a way you could, if that's what you ultimately settle on in terms of your focus for next year, if there's a way to capture that piece, if that's what you do and choose to focus on, I'd be interested to hear how that goes next year.
Thank you.
Yeah,
We do have a measurement to use for individual case managed students on SEL that we use at times called the SEED, which is a social, emotional, and academic development. It's a self-report. It's not, there's pros and cons to a self-report for student assessment, but, it's a tool that we are using.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ford?
Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the information. Just a couple of quick questions. I wanted to know, I know that students, family members have the right of refusal. Do you return to those students? And if so, what's the time period in between the first ask and the follow-up?
I wouldn't say we have a formal time frame when we receive a referral and we attempt to engage with the student and the parent to offer those services. We'll engage with them up to 3 times to try to get the permission. And if we don't, what we say is, if you need us, we're here. So if that answers your question.
It does, it does. I also wanted to know, for the site coordinators, do you have any site coordinators that are bilingual?
Currently, no, we do not.
Do you see?
Not at Emmaus. We have several in other of our districts.
Okay. Is there any opportunity maybe at some point maybe to share those? Yeah.
It's very hard because our model of service is one site coordinator per building, so to ask them to come out. But we have some folks who are willing to help translate at difficult times, especially when crises happen. We often reach out to the schools and say, hey, if you need additional help, we can, support them with some of our other coordinators. But usually it's in a time of crisis, but.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just noting, I know in East Bend School District that we have a large community of bilingual students. So I was just wondering. You also had mentioned about the need for therapists, and I was wondering, was any consideration given to online therapists in the absence of, direct person-to-person?
Yeah, I know there's programs out there that allow for online therapy. I know a district is using one right now. I don't know how heavily accessed it is. I'd be curious to look into the level of engagement that students have with it. We don't have a contract or a service that does that. But when we do have a student who needs therapy, we're working directly with the family to understand what their insurance might already have available to them and access those things. But we ourselves don't have online therapists or connections, but that's how we would work with a student or family in that need.
All right, thank you. And just lastly, you mentioned about the scholarship, and I was just curious, what's the criteria?
They have to be a CIS case managed student. For any given amount of time. They have to be a senior who's ready to graduate, and they write an essay about the impact that CIS has had on them, and then they also write an essay around one of the 5 basics and how that relates to their life. And we have a screening committee of board members and community members who review those and score them, and we were able to give out 4 this year. Emmaus High School was a recipient, student was a recipient.
That's excellent. I hope that program gets to expand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. Mr. Jankowski?
Thanks. First, thank you for the presentation and, more importantly, the services and support you're providing. I really appreciate the level of detail year over year that you've provided us. You've clearly heard our comments from prior years, so thank you. My one question is, with respect to the case managed students, and this might be for Ms. Carolla too, I noticed that the academic goal percentage has dropped for both IR and Emmaus, and looking at the kind of like the number of the demographics of the students, it looks like a larger proportion of the students are regular education students. So are you seeing a correlation of is it the regular education students that aren't meeting the academic goals, and if so, are you working with these students to get them learning support to help them in latter years achieve our goals, or?
I can't speak to the data to understand at this moment how many of the students who made academic progress are considered special ed or IEP. We can digest that data a little bit. I don't have that information here tonight, but I can look into that. What I can share is while the percentage may have gone down by what looks like a significant amount, the number of students with those goals has gone up. So last year was 44 making progress. This year was 42. But we had 50 with a goal and 53 with a goal. So we're not seeing dramatic amounts of numbers of students, but the percentage is based on the total number of students who had the goal. So that might be why we're seeing that decrease. But as far as the special education versus regular education, I'd have to dig deeper. I don't have that.
But are additional resources being provided to the students who are not meeting their goals?
Yes, I think to add on to what Wendy was just alluding to, students can have more than one goal area. And so, for instance, a student with an academic goal could also have an attendance goal, right? And so we would make sure that we're connecting students with the resources that are appropriate in order to help move the needle on whatever the goals are for the student. So absolutely, as Wendy really highlighted, neither of our site coordinators work in a silo, and they are very involved and integrated in the school community with all of our resources. And so they absolutely know when appropriate to do the handoff to one of our staff members to facilitate additional levels of support.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. You said at one point that you saw improvements when students were getting to the right resources, not just being sent to CIS. Is that something where, since you've been in the school now for 7 years, people are more in tune with what you guys are doing? Like, where was that improvement originating from?
I think it's a combination of things, and I'll actually let Dr. speak about that as well. But I think it's a refinement of the process. They've really, the teams have really worked together to make the MTSS process, specific and targeted, which is critical. And what we find when we go into a school, if they don't have, and I'm not saying you didn't have good processes, but sometimes it's like, oh, there's a new service, we're gonna, just put it all there. And initially we're like, yes. But then it's like, well, wait a minute, we get a little too overwhelmed, and you water that service and support down. So I think it's a combination of the team and the school working towards that MTSS process and refining it, and us really, Amy and Kristen, knowing their skills and their, talents and the type of students they're able to work with. And when they're not, the right person, they're connecting with those other resources in the building. So I think it's a combination of.
Yeah, I'd just be happy to echo exactly what Wendy just described. And I think if you think back to the year 2018, and you kind of watch the evolution of supports that we have added over that time frame, it's really been significant. And we're really, I believe, continuing to trend in the right direction. So I think in part what we initially saw when we brought on the partnership with communities and schools is exactly as she described. We were funneling most students that were in need of support to communities and schools because that was one of the few resources that we have. And now as we're able to diversify the different levels and intensities and types of supports, we are able to identify the right students for the right supports. And I think that has really helped us, again, increase the success rates with our students and help build that connection between case managed students and the site coordinators, knowing that they can be very involved with their skill sets to actually make some progress with those students.
Thank you. Any additional questions from the board? All right. Well, thank you again for the presentation. And keep up the good work. Thank you. Okay, moving on. For the personnel, there are a couple items I'd like to highlight. First was an addendum to the personnel agenda. It was posted earlier today. So those added items are on the board docs website. And one correction under item 17, support staff transfer assignments. Brian Wukich is transferring from West Coastville to Willow Lane. With that, I'd like to now call for a motion to approve the personnel items.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Mr. Ford?
Aye.
Ms. Ford, I'm sorry.
Okay. I knew you meant me.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Klotz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. I believe Dr. Campbell would like to make some remarks.
Just wanted to recognize the retirement of 2 East Penn team members that were effective actually last week, but specifically Barb Borgioni, who has retired she served as an academic support assistant and was really a critical member of our team at Willow Lane Elementary School. And we were so fortunate to have her there for the past 11 years. And James Urbanowitz, who is affectionately known by his friends and colleagues in the maintenance department as Jimmy U. He has served in our maintenance department, most recently in the utility and maintenance garage, and he's been with us for 35 years. So again, 2 individuals who've really dedicated a tremendous amount of time to the East Penn community, and we congratulate them and wish them well on their retirement.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Okay, next item on the agenda is business operations. If there are no objections, I'd like to get a motion to take items A through E together.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the board? All right, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Ms. Ford?
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Klotz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Moving on to curriculum, item A, educational conferences. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the board? Seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Jankowski?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Klotz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Falegi?
Aye.
Ms. Ford?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Item B under curriculum is a presentation on curriculum revision for K through 8 math and K through 5 ELA. Dr. Campbell, would you like to introduce?
Yes, we have several members of our OTL team, as well as some teachers who are with us who have been a critical part of the curriculum revision process. And so they're here this evening. Tonight, again, is informational. It's a presentation of curriculum revisions. The board will have an opportunity to answer questions, hear feedback, and then the board will ultimately take action at the upcoming board meeting on the specific changes that are being proposed. So I'll turn things over to Dr. Thatcher.
All right, thank you and good evening. What you're about to hear tonight is an overview of the curriculum revision, the most recent in K-8 math, K-5 ELA, and 7th grade ELA. So I will be beginning with the K-8 math and setting the stage in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to just give a shout out to the teams of math teachers who have worked feverishly over the past, I'd say about 2 years, to bring this forward, what you're about to see tonight. They're very proud of what we're sharing with you tonight, so I'm excited to begin this presentation. So the first thing that I'm going to review is the root cause analysis. And some of you may remember that in the fall of 2022, we embarked on the process of a root cause analysis with our K-8 math teams. And through that process, we really looked critically at our programming and our curricular resource, and we worked closely with teachers, teacher leaders, building leaders, instructional specialists, and instructional coaches. And through that, we were able to have conversations about the challenges that teachers saw emerging for themselves as instructional leaders, for their students, and for their families. And so on the slide, you can see a summary of some of the things that came out of that, but I want to highlight most importantly, we were able to go into a review of our resource, and so we were able to look at what some of our demographically like peers were using. We reviewed other options as a curricular resource, and ultimately iReady was reaffirmed as our math curricular resource. So then we moved forward to mapping that to the core academic standards for mathematics and drilling down to the anchor performance by grade level and mapping that back to the iReady lessons to ensure that everything was being taught thoroughly to the standards. And so from there, we really were able to work with curriculum associates and our teaching teams to build something that fit within the structure of East Penn School District, whether that was the K-5 instructional minutes with the focus on small group or the challenges that we were facing at the middle level with the 40-minute period. So that was the way in which we approached that particular piece to address those challenges in addition to the targeted professional development and the sequencing and pacing. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tiffany Schimmel, who is one of our instructional coaches that was integral in supporting this work, and she's going to speak a little bit about how the pacing was realigned.
So the Office of Teaching and Learning put together grade level teacher teams to build these new pacing guides that sort of align the PDE standards with our student needs and also our district calendar. So all of that stuff sort of made sense. mapping it out so veteran teachers and new teachers could have that resource, that same resource. Now, I got to work specifically with the 7th grade team, and we used so many different things to put those different pacing things together. But one thing in particular was the spiraling of content, so that students weren't just introduced to something one time during the school year, but it appeared multiple times. And it seems to have come together really nicely across K to 8.
So that brings us to the alignment to standards, and Dr. Tricia Gutman is going to speak to that.
Good evening. So the alignment between the iReady math topic bands and the Pennsylvania core standards involves ensuring that the curriculum topics, as Dr. Thatcher shared, corresponded to the expectations and competencies outlined in the state standards. The topic bands that were included were numbers and operations, geometry, algebraic concepts, measurement, data, and probability. You have already heard us talk about the look-fors. The iReady look-fors are guidelines and observable indicators that both leaders and teachers can use for effective teaching. These look-fors are the key elements for teaching and learning to promote student success in mathematics. So to give an example, right here we see establishing goals to focus learning. If you're observing in a classroom, you should be seeing the teacher set clear objectives, which are set, and then a clear student focus. Another example underneath supporting productive struggle you would be able to observe the teacher providing opportunities for students to engage in challenging tasks, and teachers giving appropriate wait time and scaffolding to support them through any difficulties. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Murphy.
Hi, everyone. So something that's really important to us when we are choosing curriculum materials is looking at research and studies that have looked at that material in contexts other than our own. So EdReports is one source that we use for our curricular vetting. It's probably one of the most go-to sources for most educational entities. It is a nonprofit with the goal of providing accessible research and studies to ensure educators can make informed decisions regarding their instructional resources and practices. So it is sort of like a go-to storage house for all that information that helps you make good informed decisions. So this particular study focused on 3 particular areas, and this is consistent across most of EdReport's studies. So for focus, the materials assess grade level content and provide all students who are using this program extensive work with grade level programs to meet the full intent of grade level standards. This is really important because sometimes you find that programs over differentiate items, and then students are not receiving access to that high, rigorous grade level content. And for coherence, they're looking that indicated that the materials are coherent and consistent with the Common Core standards for mathematical practice. This is an important note because you heard Dr. Thatcher share that we also then map the ready resources to the PA Core anchor standards and eligible content. So that's an important additional step that we took here in the district to ensure that we weren't missing anything that our state requires versus what the Common Core required. So in addition, for rigor and mathematical practices, the materials also help students develop procedural fluency skills and application. The materials also make meaningful connections between the standards of mathematical content and the standards of mathematical practice. So do we understand what it is like conceptually, and are we able to then take those conceptual understandings and put them into practice on paper or in an application? And then the final piece was usability, and there they look at 4 additional categories, which is teacher support. So do teachers have the materials and resources that they need to differentiate when appropriate, and slides and all the other materials that they might need to make their planning and preparation easier. In addition, they look at assessment, student support, so resources that are student-facing, and intentional design. And now I'm going to hand it over to Mrs. Pethick, and she's going to talk us through what the additional topics look like in our K-5 model.
Thank you. I'll let you that. Okay.
touching her equipment, and I'm not really sure how to operate it. I'm Holly Pethick. I'm a 4th and 5th grade math and science teacher at Lincoln Elementary, and I'm also our district's elementary math coordinator. Their content leader, as they call me. So I'm here just to kind of walk you through what the new guides look like. But I'm not going to read everything up there because I think you guys have a copy of this. So we have 4 domains. We call them domains in iReady. In kindergarten, they actually have 5 domains. So we have counting, cardinality, operations and algebraic thinking, numbers and operations, measurement and geometry. Those repeat throughout all of our K through 5 pacing guides and our content. They get a little bit different, so I'm going to go to 1st grade. Now we don't have cardinality anymore. That now is gone, and it's been rolled into operations and algebraic thinking and numbers and operations in base 10. So as I go to 2nd grade, I still have my 4 domains. I go to 3rd grade, they now have pulled numbers and operations. This is one of the big times in 3rd grade that we start to see fractions come into play. They've pulled apart base 10 numbers, which are whole numbers in our decimal system, and fractions. It's still under one category for us, but in here we pulled it apart because they're 2 major topics. So when I go to 3rd or 4th grade, which is one of the grades I teach, we see the same thing. So we see a lot of decimal work and a lot of fraction work. And in 5th grade, it's the same. So I think the biggest thing that we need to know when we're looking from K through 5 is that each year builds upon what their kids or students have learned the year before. And it's one big spiral. So you're going to see a content start in kindergarten, and you might not see that content phase out until we get to the 5th grade materials. So I was actually looking at this. One of the big ones in kindergarten is they start with understanding the idea of adding on and taking away. Then when we get to 1st grade, we see that now they're learning to add and subtract up to 20. In 2nd grade, they're learning to add and subtract up to 20 with borrowing and regrouping. In 4th grade and 3rd grade, they do the same, similar adding and subtracting. 4th grade is now when they take that and they start to pull it apart, where they're using that basic skill of adding and subtracting, only they're now doing it with decimals. And then in 5th grade, we're now seeing the same skill, adding and subtracting, that started in kindergarten, going all the way up to 5th grade. So there's one big spiral that's happening. And as kids are progressing up through the grade level, we're asking them to take this content and interact with it in a more challenging way that we then is reflected in our PSSAs. All right, thank you. I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Schimmel. Dr. Schimmel? She's coming back.
So before I was an instructional coach, I've been a teacher here at East Penn for 15 years, so I'm going to nerd out just a little bit with the math. So the same thing continues in 6 through 8, where we see that increasing complexity, but I'm going to show you really quickly, just demonstrate the through line just a little bit, and you're going to see some really fun spiraling. So in grade 5, they are doing some analyzing of relationships. In grade 6, we shift to representing relationships. In grade 7, we shift back to analyzing relationships, but multiple relationships this time. And then in 8th, we're back to representing, but now the kids have to represent proportional relationships. So it's increasing in complexity. And you can also sort of see that spiraling across grade levels, where we're analyzing and then we're representing and so forth, right? So I'm going to go back to 6th. So here in 6th grade, there's a lot of applying and extending different concepts, but there's also the ratios and proportionality. It starts to come in here, and it has a really interesting sort of progress through 7th and 8th as well. So it's extended in 7th, but then it merges with algebraic concepts in 8th grade. So in 7th, there is a huge increase in real-world applications and problem solving. And the geometry concepts are starting to get beefed up as well. So in 8th grade, the proportion category looks like it goes away. It actually just merges with the expressions and equations to do that proportional representation, right? So also functions and irrational numbers make an appearance here to get them ready for some more difficult concepts later in 9 through 12. So I think I'm turning it back to Dr. Thatcher now.
All right, and so this is something that we're really excited to present to you tonight, especially our sixth grade math team who worked on this, and it's something that they're really passionate about, is the Course 1-2 pilot for this upcoming school year. Currently, students in East Penn who are in 5th grade and entering into 6th grade have the option to enroll in Course 1, which is traditional 6th grade math, or Course 2, which is traditional 7th grade math. It's important to note that this is a data-based placement. It uses a variety of data points, and these have been selected through a variety of metrics, including tracking cohort success into the future, in addition to working with our providers such as iReady and FastBridge to ensure that the scores and data points that we're selecting are at a rigor level that's going to ensure that students are prepared to meet the threshold of success for skipping content. And so, yes, I did say skipping content because if you go into 6th grade and into Course 2, you skip all of 6th grade math. And so we have seen success with many students in that accelerated model. However, it's left a hole for some of our students who have demonstrated some above grade level skills, but perhaps weren't quite ready to skip that content. So the Course 1-2 pilot fills that gap by offering students an accelerated model that instead will condense. And so students in this pilot would take all of 6th grade math and the first half of 7th grade math in their 6th grade year. Then in 7th grade, they would take the second half of 7th grade math and all of 8th grade math. And so what this does is a few things. So first, if students enter into this accelerated model in 6th grade and think, gee, this is not for me, they can then re-enter into Course 2 in 7th grade. So maybe somebody who wasn't prepared to take the risk might be more willing if they and their family know that there is another place for them to recoup those lost skills if they start to feel like it's difficult. And the other thing that it does is prepares them for the opportunity to take Algebra 1 in 8th grade. And so that puts them on track to take calculus in their senior year within this accelerated model. And if for some reason students had a goal of taking it perhaps in their junior year, there are other secondary accelerated options that would be specific to students. They'd work with their families and the core team at their building to determine which of those models, perhaps testing out or taking something in the summer, would be available to them. But we really encourage people to think about what is the goal instead of just plowing forward, that we're going deeper into the mathematical concepts. So this pilot, if approved, would run for this coming school year. We would enroll 6th graders into it, and then the Course 2-3 pilot would run the following school year, the 25-26 school year, and more information would be presented about that in a future presentation during the school year. The course would be, so the 1-2 pilot, we would evaluate how that's going based on following closely students' assessments that are being given in the classroom, our screeners and our benchmarks, teacher feedback, and conducting walkthroughs. And so this is something we're really excited for you to consider and passionate about the ability for us to offer some additional courses and options for our students here at East Penn. And so with that, I'm going to hand it to Dr. Gutman and Dr. Murphy, and they're going to begin the ELA portion of tonight's curriculum presentation.
Okay, just as Dr. Thatcher shared with you earlier, a team of teachers worked tirelessly with Aaron and I for our curriculum revisions for ELA K-5. Representatives from each building in both regular ed and special ed were on the team, and many of them wanted to be there tonight, but they were on vacation. So I will get started. When we started looking at revisions for our curriculum, we looked at the simple view of reading. And this is a framework that explains that reading comprehension is the product of two primary components: decoding, which is the ability to translate written language, text into spoken word, and language comprehension, the ability to understand spoken language. So both of these components are essential, and if there are deficiencies in either one, it can lead to decreased reading comprehension. So this model here emphasizes the strong reading skills required both for the ability to recognize words and the ability to understand language. So from the simple to the little bit more complex here is Scarborough's rope. We took a deep dive into Scarborough's rope to develop an effective reading curriculum for our learners. Scarborough's rope is a model that explains the complexity of skilled reading. And it has a metaphor of a rope, and these intertwined strands help us to become skilled readers. Again, just as I mentioned with the simple view, looking at specifically decoding, which includes phonological awareness, which is the understanding of how sounds sound in words, decoding, which is the translation of letters into sounds, and sight recognition, instantly knowing a familiar word. And then into the language comprehension, in which we build background knowledge, the importance of vocabulary and understanding word meaning, language structures, which include grammar and sentence structure, verbal reasoning to make inferences or use metaphors, and literacy knowledge, which is understanding text structures or different genres. So as a reader becomes more proficient, these strands are kind of woven together to create a skilled reader. Over to Dr. Murphy.
So I know we finished the math portion of the presentation, but some quick math here. So researchers have done additional research. So researchers have done additional research on Scarborough's rope. And ultimately, they offer this model as a way of saying that if one of the pieces is missing, it doesn't work. And what we found when we evaluated the programming and resources that we were offering our teachers was that some of our pieces were missing. While our programming was really strong in certain areas, there were other areas that needed additional bulking up. So what we did in this revision process is we made sure that all of our resources were aligned to evidence-based practices. So that rope that Dr. Gutman just shared with you, we literally went thread by thread and made sure that we had resources and programming that addressed each of those components for students in our core. And then we made sure that we had those resources and they were available to all teachers and all students. And to ensure that students are receiving those resources, that's where those walkthroughs come back into play. So making sure that our walkthroughs are occurring so that we can ensure that our look-fors are happening so that we know that all of our students are receiving the programming that we know works because it's aligned to those evidence-based practices. In addition to the materials, there's also been pretty intensive professional development provided to our teachers. In particular, we've been having a battery of trainings done on the science of reading. We've also had program-specific professional development. So in particular, in the last few years, we've brought on Hegarty and Foundations. Those are two fairly intensive phonemic awareness and phonics programs. So there's specific training that has been done in relation to those programs. In addition, decodable texts, which are texts that require students to actually decode words rather than using guessing strategies, looking at a picture to guess what's on the page. They actually have to decode the letters that are in the words. And then in addition, we've also brought on additional evidence-based interventions. And this seems a little bit silly, but we've also sort of a back to basics approach of the gradual release model, which is the I do, we do, you do model of instruction. So as the teacher, I'm going to model something for you. I'm going to show you how we're going to do it. And then we're going to do it together, sort of a shared approach. And then then you're going to do it. And I'm going to work with you and give you feedback on that skill or idea. And then I'm also going to then transition directly into our 7th grade ELA and reading. So some of you are likely aware, previously our 7th grade ELA programming has consisted of an ELA course, which covered all of the reading and writing standards for 7th grade, and a communications course, which focused specifically on the speaking and listening standards for 7th grade. What we have found is that there was a time where that was really important and really relevant, and when the PA core added those speaking and listening standards, it was something new, and we wanted to make sure that at the middle level there was a course explicitly designed that allowed students to explore those skills. However, especially in recent years, those skills really have been integrated across our curriculums. In almost every class, there's an opportunity for students to debate or present or even just turn and talk and practice what it's like to talk to someone in an informal setting. So it became less imperative to have a course completely devoted to that. In addition, post-COVID, we are just seeing a rising number of kids that need additional time to learn to read and write. So a logical solution to us was to follow a model that already existed in our 6th grade. So in our 6th grade classes, rather than condensing all of the ELA content into one 42-minute course, the students have 2 courses, an ELA course, which focuses for a majority of the time on our writing standards, and a reading course, which focuses for the majority of the time on our reading standards. So we're putting that model in place in our 7th grade courses. And why would we do this? We're increasing the amount of time in reading and writing instruction. And probably the most important thing in any MTSS model is the strength of your core, of tier 1. So we just need to make sure that our students are having enough time to conquer those reading and writing standards. I do want to emphasize, though, that while I'm saying that one course focuses majority of the time on those writing standards, that doesn't mean that kids aren't reading and addressing reading eligible content in writing, because for anyone who has spent any time in an ELA course, you know that they're sort of like completely intertwined, so they can't be separated completely. Just a quick overview of what the units look like is up here on the screen. So you'll see that students are going to still have time to explore drama. There's going to be argument writing, and with that, there's also going to be debate. So you'll see some of those speaking and listening skills. Some of the things the kids really liked about the communications course will be carried over into this new revised ELA and reading curriculum. And that is the end of our curriculum presentation, and we'd be happy to take any questions from the board.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Point of order.
Mr. Smith?
They hit us with the old 1-2 of reading and math tonight. Any chance, sorry, ELA and math, any chance we can do a round of math questions and then a round of ELA?
Sure, we can divide that. Okay, so for now, we're going to take questions on the math section.
Okay. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Like I said, you hit us with the 1-2, so we're going to have a lot of questions for you, I'm sure, if past presentations are any predictor of what's going to come tonight. The one thing, maybe the biggest thing, I think that is probably weighing on many of our minds right now, and this is where I'm framing all of my math questions from, is the trend in math standardized performance and the way that we measure our kids' progress. And we are not, while we are seeing trends here locally, and that's what our focus is what's happening in our classrooms here locally, we're not certainly immune to the trend that has not just hit us, it's hit all across the state, and it's nationally as well. So for what a variety of reasons, and I'm hoping you can maybe shed some insight into that. Over the past several years, going back pre-pandemic, there was a trend in a decline in math scores, and I'm wondering, I guess, for my first question, when you were doing the research with Ed Reports, did they happen to go into, as you're exploring all of the curricular resources, did they happen to go into that topic at all in terms of, here's a resource that a district uses as part of their curriculum to help turn things around a little bit? I know that they have the scale and the color scale and all of that, which is certainly helpful. It's kind of like Consumer Reports, which I use when I'm making my decisions of where I want to go. But I guess that's the big question weighing on our mind. And when we look at our little piece of the puzzle in the context of the broad landscape in our country regarding math, I'm wondering if you were able to pull out anything like that from your research before you picked the the resource?
So in the Ed Report study, that would not be part of something that you would pull out of Ed Reports, simply because Ed Reports does third-party research. So they're using metrics to determine whether or not a student can learn and grow with the program, not necessarily aligning it to standards in any given state.
And to build on that, the question about curricular resources, we have seen a variety of different districts show success with a variety of different resources, including iReady. And so I think it really does come down to the specific parameters that exist within that district, the resources to implement it, the professional development, all of those things, the schedule. It can be very specific to the ecosystem in a specific district.
My next follow-up question, the spiraling, which you focused on, is that new? Is that something, I mean, it's not new, but is that something that we typically haven't had in East Penn or math classes? Is that like a new approach for us structurally?
I don't want to say it's new. I think that teachers were doing it in pockets for the most part, but I don't think that it was something that was necessarily spelled out as something that you should be doing, and particularly for our newer teachers who might not be veteran teachers coming from another district or perhaps didn't have that experience. It might be something that they hadn't realized that they should be doing. And so we were really intentional about pointing that out and highlighting that within the curriculum resource and also within the pacing. So as teachers work together in teams, they're able to ensure that that's happening, and they do try to stay on the same page. So for example, in 6th grade, that team across both middle schools works really hard to make sure that no matter whose room you go into, the same thing's happening. And so when we talk about spiraling and including that within the pacing, I think it's more speaking to that so that students are getting the same experience no matter what teacher they have and what building they're in.
And the reason why I asked that is because as I'm putting all of my line of questioning together, I see what we have in front of us as our best attempt at turning around the trend, right? Whether it fails or not, this is it. And it makes a lot of sense to me. I'm not certainly questioning anything in it. But when I take a look at the trends and I take a look at, okay, maybe a not new, but a bigger focus on that spiraling, let's say, one of the pieces that I've seen, and now I am coming down to a narrower focus here. One of the pieces that I've seen is a need for a greater focus on procedural fluency, computational fluency, so that we can stop the age-old knee-jerk almost habit of the teacher welcoming in the new students, finding out that they don't know how to fill in the blank, turning around and blaming the folks that were responsible for those kids getting them at that point with those particular skills. So with the spiraling, I'm hoping that we can build that communication across grade levels so that we are all putting focus on building that fluency, and so that we can then do the deeper level analysis and the more strategic thinking that is part of math, but has to come from a sense of knowing how numbers work together and how to be computationally fluent.
Yes, and I just wanted to mention that this is something I should have touched on, I suppose, but when we did this work, a really wonderful thing was that we did have like K-5 in one room, for example, and some really rich conversations happened about, for example, 2nd grade saying, well, how can I support you in 3rd grade knowing that you're going to teach this skill and we might not have enough time to prepare on it in our current pacing? What can we do? What can we add in extra? Time came up and money came up, for example. Those were two concepts that at the elementary level, habitually students were coming without the necessary foundational skills just because of the way that the pacing was structured. And so that was something that the grade levels were able to work together to address. And so we're hoping to see, I think we have seen some really great success because while this is being put forward now to the board, they have gone through the entire last year using it. it's been a work in progress. And as you know, the iReady curricular resource was approved pre-COVID, and then there was massive interruptions when we would have done the pacing and things like that. So that's why you see the lag. And I think that what we really did is try, as you said, put forth that best attempt, being really critical and really intentional, and taking our time to make sure that we have it right. And also understanding that we need to be flexible. So if there are things that we don't have right, we need to address them.
And then the last, go ahead.
I was going to share one thing that I think is really important, because I hear you, like, what's different? And an additional thing that has changed recently and is probably even more improved for the coming year is that we have worked really hard to ensure that all of our elementary students receive an equitable amount of time in math instruction. So for various reasons, our elementary buildings in the past had various different instructional minutes. So for example, in buildings where they share a cafeteria and their cafeteria is also their gym, like they had to run different schedules. And many of our buildings share specialists. So like health, well fit teachers, art teachers, they travel between buildings. So buildings had different schedules. So over the last year and moving into this year, we have aligned our instructional minutes. So every student in third grade has 80 minutes of math instruction, and that is consistent across the building. So that alone, we do think will help improve student access to high-level instructional content. And in addition, over the last few years, you've heard us talk about what I need time, and that has really in the past been historically focused on literacy skills. So essentially, if a student has mastered their literacy skills and they need math, then we'll put them in a math intervention. But really, it was about getting them to be able to read. This coming year, we're adding a math intervention time. So we're in shifting the model, we're shifting the name because, you know, everyone loves branding, right? So we're calling it I&E time, so intervention and enrichment time. So no more WIN. We're calling it intervention and enrichment time, and now students will have access to that time for reading and for math. So there'll be a math time for interventions as well.
Okay, the last line of questions I wanted to touch on was relating to the pilot. And it kind of connects to what I was talking about earlier. And forgive me if, you know, we're coming into this late, right? So all the work and the conversations have legwork's all been done. So if there's questions that I have that are not quite to the depth that you would expect, just forgive me for that. But as I'm looking at you know, and those of you that know me know that I'm all about accelerating when appropriate, and when a kid can demonstrate a particular proficiency in a particular skill, that moving on, whether it's in the context of a lesson or an entire course, that should be available to them. So I love that this is an option. So it's kind of where we're going. I just want to make sure that the conversations are being had, so we're being cautious and deliberate about as we go through the pilot. When we're having kids go from course 1-2 into 2-3, and we're deciding whether that's a good fit or not, to make sure that we're having deliberate conversations over some of those skills I was talking about earlier, to make sure that we're not unintentionally moving kids along that historically have fit that particular learning profile, but maybe they don't demonstrate that particular skill. And that compounds later on down the line. So I know that when we're talking about things like this, that can have a tendency to happen. And I know it's something we're all aware of. I just want to make sure that we're being deliberate as we make those choices a year from now.
Absolutely. And I will share that this year was a year that we tightened up our Course 2 rubric because of some of those reasons that you were stating, that we were seeing students who were accelerated perhaps too quickly and experiencing some challenges as they got to more difficult concepts, whether that was in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, or beyond at the high school. And so students who may have historically qualified for Course 2 this year may not have qualified and then would be then qualifying for that course 1-2 to sort of bridge that gap so that they're getting those skills that they need. And in order to ensure that they're getting the skills that they need, because really the content itself is not different from 6th grade or 7th grade. It's the same content, nothing is removed. It's just going a little quicker. So the 6th grade team took those pacing guides and the recommended pacing from Curriculum Associates and then went through that same process as they did with the K-8 work to ensure that there were no gaps and that the standards are addressed and that nothing is missing in order to best attempt to safeguard against missing really important skills that you can't necessarily recoup later.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bowman.
I have a question about the pilot too. I'm just sort of confused, and I think it's because you're using maybe different words for some of these courses that I was used to. What I thought was happening before, and correct me if I'm wrong, your on-level kids were taking 6th grade math, I think was just called 6th grade math.
Course
7th grade
1
was pre-algebra, and 8th grade was algebra?
So 6th grade is course 1, 7th grade is course 2, and 8th grade is course 3 or algebra 1 based on the placement. And it's been that way for several years, I believe.
And I thought your accelerated kids were doing pre-algebra in 6th, algebra in 7th, algebra 2 in 8th. So are they not doing that now under the pilot?
So if students would qualify to go into that course 2, which I believe is what you're referring to as the pre-algebra, they would still take Alg 1 in 7th and then Alg 2 in 8th.
Okay.
However, in the past, when we were sort of running kids through who perhaps were on the cusp, and then once they were getting to, let's say, Alg 2, and then they're hitting a wall now, maybe because of some of those concepts that were skipped in 6th grade, now there's another option for students who are demonstrating above grade level in some of the indicators, but maybe not all. We have about, I want to say, 8 different data points that we look at throughout the school year. And so in order to qualify for course 2, you can really only miss one of those because skipping an entire grade level is a big deal. But let's say you miss 2 or 3, you still might benefit from some acceleration. So that's where then they would go into that course 1-2 and just have the accelerated condensed version instead of skipping. And they would not be in Alg 2 in 8th grade. So they would be in Alg 1 in 8th grade. However, with the foundational skills, and then there are additional, if they have that goal that they need to reach calculus before senior year, there are additional routes and progressions that they could follow to wind up in the same place.
Makes sense. I think it's important the way this decision is explained to parents. I'm going to tell you how I think it was explained to me was that 6th grade math is the same as 5th grade math, and your kid basically doesn't need it, so go ahead and go straight to algebra, or whatever it was, pre-algebra.
Right.
Now, I'm watching your faces, so I know that apparently that wasn't actually the case. So, but I think it's really important that parents and kids know they're skipping a grade in math. Because it does eventually catch up at some point.
Right.
In our case, it was in geometry. So, which was really too late for even this new model to help out. So anyway, I'm happy that you're changing it. I just hope that once you decide whether to continue with the pilot, that the messaging is very clear from guidance counselors, I guess mostly 5th grade math teachers who will be explaining it to parents, exactly what the choices are that they're making if they're going to decide to accelerate. Yeah, okay. And I did have a quick question about it's not really, it's more of a comment. I'm really happy to hear that you're adding math to what used to be called win time, the I&E time. I'm hoping that solves the problem for the kids who get pull-out, whether it's gifted or IEP pull-outs. I vaguely remember in elementary school that a lot of times those pull-outs were happening during math, and it was like the one class that you really can't make up after you miss a day of it. So I'm hoping that now that you're adding math to WIN, that if they get pulled out for any of those things that can happen maybe during their WIN time or their, INE time. It's going to take me a while to change names of things.
We're really excited to be offering math as well. It's been a need, and so that's a really exciting thing that we're able to do.
So
I think WIN's already branded, to your point.
Yes.
So, I'm on my third kid in WIN. It's always going to be WIN.
Okay.
Mr. Kelly.
I love the fluency between K to 8 and leading it, like what you guys did with the skills. And I appreciate all the work, and I understand the work that goes into writing the curriculums. And I see that you use the unit by design format. And where I have a major concern, and I'm hearing it in the comments about the success being specific to the district, is why you left out stages 2 and 3 in the unit by design format.
We only present stage 1 for board approval.
Okay, so what I'm interested in is what's actually, are we using the iReady program? Are we teaching it the way at iReady or Ready Math, I guess, in 6 through 8 as a focus? K to 5, what I've seen and the feedback that I've gotten from that is very much the iReady connection to and growth mindset and fluency and interpretation. I'm not in stages 2 and 3 in the unit by design format. That's where they're focusing on the instruction, the blended instruction, and what I'm seeing and hearing from my own kids is a lot of direct instruction. And I'd like to understand what our school district is doing to bring in a blended design, and I'd like to understand what's happening in the classrooms.
Sure. So the stage 2 and 3 documents look the same for all grade levels K through 8. There's nothing different between K5 and 6-8. It is consistent. So I'll start by sharing that along with the format of the pacing guides. One thing that I am really proud of, and I will speak to this, our middle level teams have put in an incredible amount of work over the last several years to really go against that barrier of the 40-minute period. So something that elementary has that the middle level does not is additional time where they're able to do some additional things, like maybe they can do math in action lessons, or perhaps they're able to run small groups. So something that we really focused on a year and a half ago was providing professional development on how to run small group instruction or station rotations at the middle level. And then last year, working with building leaders in order to provide some of the release time needed to plan those things within the 40 minutes. And so I will say I have done a great deal of walkthroughs over the last 2 years in math classrooms. And when I walk in, I've been seeing some really wonderful things. Most recently, something that stuck out to me was one of our 6th grade classrooms. They had release time from the building principal. They had planned a 3 rotation model, so all of the teachers were doing it. And then when I went into that room, they were utilizing their special ed co-teachers. They were utilizing other adults in the room to provide that sort of experience to students. And so that's been a focus at the middle level. And I would say that maybe initially they were concerned, like, how will I do this with 40 minutes? But like I said, they really, boots to the ground, have been working hard to figure out how to make that happen for students and how to differentiate within that time period to offer that sort of experience and opportunity.
So so can you then kind of fill in some gaps for me? So you're saying that the students, it's not a direct instruction model.
There's both. So there's opportunities for direct instruction, there's opportunities for peer discourse, there's opportunities for individual work, there's opportunities for group work. So each lesson within iReady, and again, it's the same K-8, there's explore and refine lessons, and within those lessons, there's very specific routines, instructional routines that are being followed, and they ebb and flow between direct instruction and inquiry-based opportunities for peer learning.
So are they initially teacher modeling, kids passively learning, and then, or are they actively like contributing to the goals of the lesson initially?
Initially, it depends on the lesson. So each lesson could be structured different depending on the goals of the lesson within iReady. However, many of the lessons begin with explore. So what do you know? Talk about what you know with your
and
partner.
our classrooms are emulating the way that iReady is and the
Yes.
philosophy of
That is,
iReady.
yes, that is the expectation that we set forth as a district and the goal that we're committed to. And so personally, when I do go into classrooms, I am seeing it happen. And if there's a situation where I don't, there's typically on-the-spot coaching happening. And we have done some really, I will say, wonderful hiring in our middle level math team in the recent years. And so I think many of our teams have come with some fresh ideas, and we've seen some really great flexible models happening that we haven't seen in years past. So
I think, and I kind of wrote this down because, even the best resources fail when, or fall, I guess I shouldn't say fail, but fall short when problem solving is not the focus of the classroom. And, and our test scores are kind of emulating that's happening. That, 21st century skills require kids to synthesize, apply, and communicate. And iReady is, the wording might be tough at times and it might be hard to do, but the feedback that I'm getting and seeing on how the lessons are actually introduced and given is, I have a hard time without seeing some of your stage 2 and stage 3 goals. I have a hard time understanding where our district lies on that.
So the board, in the board report, you were shared the suggested pacing from iReady. That is stage 3, essentially. And then stage 2 is the common assessments that come from the lesson and unit assessments that are within that pacing.
So stage 3 is like learning experiences and instruction. Approaches to teaching, they are widely in there. I didn't see anything along those lines.
So within each of the lessons, that would be where, following those routines, the teacher would be expected to emulate those routines.
And so the teachers, so you have something that's actually being posted so that teachers can see those expectations.
It's the teacher manual.
From iReady.
Yes.
Directly from iReady.
Yes. And they also have classroom look-fors, which Dr. Gutman had reviewed. So those 8 classroom look-fors are summarized for you. However, they are in much greater detail for teachers and leaders when we're working on coaching or doing walkthroughs. And those are posted on the public East Penn Math website. If you would be interested in looking at those 8 math look-fors, you would be able to see in more depth what those expectations for teachers are.
Yeah, I would really like to see what our districts, like how maybe even just like one of those, what I can expect my children and the students in our district to get inside our classroom to be, and again, is it active learning? And by active, I don't mean like walking to different stages and, getting a project that's the one that I saw that had a stage 2 that had some project attached to it was just rote fluency, and it was a link to a Google Doc. The assessment that I saw was written pretty well with a lot of, but there was again a lot of fluency with it. I think when you look at these, like an AP class. And the test the AP students are taking, there's so much interpretation and perseverance, and it's hard for me to see where we're doing that here.
It may be useful also, I believe Dr. Mahalik had shared the math website with you. There are family resources linked on there where people can go and look grade level by grade level band to see what a lesson might look like for their child. And that's public facing, available to our community.
And stage 2 is about alignment with assessments. Mm-hmm. And are our teachers aligned? Each unit has a unit assessment. It's not just built of small quizzes. The grade books that I've seen are not emulating assessments. They're small rote quizzes, and I wonder how much we are actually progressing on getting kids to take and to model like a large-scale test, a midterm, a final, an AP.
Sure. So students do prepare for the PSSA, which is probably the largest scale test that we possibly could give them. And so they do take that every year, 3rd through 8th grade. And it's up to the grade level band. What they are deciding is going to be their stage 2 common assessment. So some of the grade levels have selected the end of unit assessment, which might be a larger assessment. Some have chosen the lesson quizzes. And keeping in mind, there are multiple units. So not every unit has to be the same. Based on what the teachers know the students need to know, mapping that back to the standards, and then determining what evidence they need to collect in order to provide that evidence of the mastery of the standards. That's how they've made the decision about which assessments they're using for stage 2. And I will add that stage 2 and stage 3 can be a living document. So if they're using something, and our middle level in particular, because there are much less of them than K-5, they're very tightly aligned. So they do everything in lockstep with one another. They are comparing common assessments to say, like, where did your kids land? Where did my kids land? What skills are we missing? And so if they're finding that an assessment is not providing them with the information that they need, they do have the liberty to update stage 2 to select a different assessment.
So is a different classroom looking a different way depending on who's teaching it?
It should not.
It should.
So all of our 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade should be the same. And that is what I have experienced with my walkthroughs, is that if I am stepping from one 6th grade room to another 6th grade room, or one Algebra 1 room to another Algebra 1 room at the middle level, that they are fairly lockstep with what they're doing in terms of the pacing and the use of the resources. That's been a really big focus of the team over the last 2 years, is that students, it's been something that they feel, and we feel is really important, that no matter who you have, what building you're at, you're getting a consistent experience.
And the teachers are not supplementing material, they're using the iReady program the way it's meant to be used.
Yeah, so iReady is our main curricular resource. They do have the ability to supplement after they have exhausted iReady first. So that's not to say, I have seen that used, for example, in a 2nd grade classroom. A teacher had 5 different stations. 2 of the stations were an iReady resource. The other 3 were something else that she had created and the team had shared. So again, they share the resources. It's in the guide. It's not something that's a standalone. But iReady is always first and foremost the resource that they use.
If I could just clarify as well, in that the board's role this evening really is to look at those stage 1 curriculum documents, which is the expectation of that core curriculum for all students. And certainly, Mr. Kelly, I appreciate that you have, I appreciate you use the word, you have feedback. I think I heard you say perhaps from your own experiences, and so I respect and appreciate, and we want to delve into those experiences. I think I just want to be mindful about questions that are publicly discussed being appropriate for the role of the board in terms of for this evening's presentation. And I also want to reiterate, I know that there were, the question asked about the fidelity or the consistency in terms of instructional strategies. Let's first and foremost say the core curriculum being followed, those instructional strategies that we have as key expectations in terms of, yes, there's always going to be a time and a space for direct instruction. There's also appropriate instructional strategies where students might be working in small groups that are teacher-led. They might be working in small groups on something that's independent. And so that might look different in different classrooms depending on where they're at. There's also going to be assessments in terms of unit assessments, common assessments, smaller formative assessments that are being implemented on a regular basis. You heard Dr. Thatcher and other members of OTL talk about classroom visits or observations. I have I'm really proud of the fact that between our building leaders and the members of OTL that are here tonight, there are hundreds of classroom observations that have been done. And so when Dr. Thatcher and or other members say, yes, I can stand before you and say, this is happening consistently in classrooms, that comes from hundreds of classroom visits that have happened over not just 1 year, but multiple years. And so I also want to say, if there are concerns specific to a student's, your experience or your students' experiences, and this isn't just for board members, but for any community member, if there are questions, we are happy to address them one-on-one. I don't want to go too far this evening in terms of like really going into a specific student situation. And I say that out of courtesy to any students that might be involved, as well as any specific classrooms that might be involved.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Ms. Klotz.
Hi, I'm Dr. Thatcher. I just want to thank you and your whole team for obviously your thorough knowledge of everything with your program and for being able to explain it in depth. And I just appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Klotz. Before we move on to ELA, I have a couple, hopefully, quick questions. And I'm going to probably ask the same questions when we do get to ELA. Anytime you make changes, you want to obviously, keep track of data and information to look at success. So I was wondering if you could outline for me what you see as the key metrics to assess the success of the realignment of the K through 8.
Of the K-8, not the pilot. You're speaking to the K-8?
Yeah, the K.
Sure.
changes,
So
yeah.
we look at a variety of things. We look at our screening and diagnostic data. We look at our PSSA and Keystone data, and we also look at our PVOS projections.
Okay. So so it's the gross information that comes out of individual student
Yes.
testing.
So we, you may have heard Dr. Murphy share that we are drilling down to the anchor standards and the eligible content. So we look specifically to see our district performance, and we also look at grade level performance, and then we share that information with teachers down to the teacher level. So they have the information about the students who sit before them, how they performed last year, but then they also have the information about the students that they served last year so that they can reflect on their own teaching practice, and that is often used to refine some of the pacing. So that's been, and then in addition to the walkthroughs, as Dr. Campbell shared, and that's always a bright spot. And my week is the walkthroughs, and I do pride myself on doing as many as possible. It's wonderful to spend time with our teachers and our students. And so that's another anecdotal metric as we're in and you're able to talk to students and see things in action and in motion and talk to teachers. So another anecdotal piece next to the data piece that we're able to utilize.
Okay. You were making a distinction between K through 8 and the pilot.
Yes.
So how are you going to look at the pilot to say
Yes,
it's
so
successful?
the pilot will do much of the same thing, but we don't necessarily right this moment have the PSSA or the PVOS projection. So that might be the piece that's a little different. And we will likely be discussing the 2-3 section before we have the PSSA results from this cohort. So we would have it later, and of course we'd look at that, but it's something that we'll have to rely on some of those other measures first.
Right. Probably overall coursework performance and the like.
Yes.
Okay, and then the other question I have, I guess, is how is it's probably a little easier for me to see it on the elementary level, but how is the special ed viewpoint captured in these changes?
So members of our special ed team do participate with the on-level math teachers in creating the pacing and selecting any of those supplemental resources that might be necessary. We do the planning together, and then they're often utilized in the teaching model as well. So often they can be a direct participant, either their team teaching or they're running a station. And it might not necessarily just be students who have an IEP that they work with. But that's typically how it's captured, as they're part of the planning.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, let's move on to part 2 of the Q&A.
I'd like to make a quick comment.
Sure.
Just to comment to what Dr. Campbell was saying. I had actually sat in a meeting with the administration, 3 administrators, and been told that direct instruction was the best method. Mine is not necessarily an individual comment about my experiences. I think it's more of a comment about what I've been told and backed by some of the things that I had seen, small things. And I have to say this just flat out: that direct instruction is not a way to enhance the math capabilities of what we need today by itself. I think a blended approach is not only backed by every reputable research, but it makes it more fun. It's like going to a soccer practice and doing skills and drills and not ever getting to apply what you're doing. I am very curious as to why stages 2 and 3 would be left out, or just even a broad overview of what we do as a district. And I'm going based off of the meetings that I've had.
I appreciate the clarification. I think what you've heard tonight is, I think an alignment in that, or a recognition that direct instruction is not the only instructional model that's happening in classes, but it's certainly a critical part of, especially depending on where we might be at in a particular lesson or concept or introduction of a topic. Direct instruction is a critical part of the instructional process. Should it be 42 minutes every time, every day? No, but certainly I think
Absolutely.
we would all have an expectation that there is a level of direct instruction in a lesson that's happening. So I think we're saying the same thing tonight, maybe just in different ways.
All right, thank you. All right, let's move on to part 2 on the ELA questions. Questions from the board? Ms. Bowman?
I only actually have a comment. I was really happy to see the changes to I guess it's the middle school program where you're dropping communications and instead picking up some reading time in exchange. Absolutely agreeing with your comment about kids in East Penn learning, I forget how you put it, public speaking skills throughout their classes. I mean, we see this here at the board periodically when students come to speak and just blow us away, often serving as better role models for how to do rhetorical arguments than most of the adults that come before the board. So really, really proud of everything that's happening in our schools that help prepare our kids to do that, because I can't think of a harder atmosphere to bring your views to than an event like this, where you're talking to a board that doesn't respond. So totally agree. Just even in my memory, like all the different speaking, whether it's current events and they had to present them during social studies. So totally with you on that. You have the unit overview for writing, and it looks amazing. I mean, I think even as an adult, I'd be interested in taking some of those units, but it's not as clear what the reading component is. And could you just maybe describe like what that is and how that's going to simultaneously address the kids who are not struggling as well as the kids who are struggling?
Yes, so an overview of the units really is that we are alternating a little bit between different genres because we want to make sure that we're exposing students to those genres. I believe in the board report there was a slightly more detailed breakdown than just the overview that's here on the slides. So the explicit topics that are being addressed in the developing middle level readers is really engaging kids as independent readers. That is the focus of we have I think it's actually called the exact same thing in 6th grade and 7th grade, and it's really this like here's how you use your library, here's how you can find library sources, here's how you pick a book for yourself. They literally still work on like building independent reading stamina and what good readers do. So there's a lot of modeling and building that stamina throughout that unit. We also lay the foundation for eligible content, essentially. So it's a review of literary terms that might have been introduced in the past, a review of figurative language, and reviewing of like a plot diagram. So like, do you understand the parts of the story? And then in Unit 2, that is a mystery and a drama unit. So right now, the kids are going to read a mystery text. The way the timing works out, it launches right around Halloween, so it's kind of fun. And then they are then actually going to do a comparison, an analysis between the two, because the two, right now we're using Jekyll and Hyde and A Christmas Carol, because they both take place in Victorian England. So then they're going to compare how the setting impacts the two different stories. So that's the way it's written right now. But again, we want to see how the kids sort of engage with those two topics. And then we could choose possibly different titles in the future if the engagement isn't as high as we want it to be. Then there's poetry unit. That one is aligned to novels in verse, which is a sort of up-and-coming genre for kids that is super engaging and still follows the same elements, literary elements that are really important for kids to grasp, but then they do it through poetry. Informational text and memoir, again, sort of as it describes, kids are now going to stretch their informational text skills deeper. There's informational text integrated into all of the units, but this unit really focuses on informational text. Right now, the title aligned with that is, oh my goodness, I don't want to say it out loud because I'm afraid I'm gonna say it wrong. It's one of the Anne Frank titles, but it's not like The Diary. It's a more 7th grade engaging title. And then reading like a researcher, it's as it is described, they're going to do research, and it's all about research skills. And then the last unit is a realistic fiction. We end the year with lit circles, book clubs. And again, that one is really going to, like, now you're really comfortable with the people in your class. Now we're going to talk to them, and you're going to debate, and you're going to engage in this text that you just read like an adult might reading a book club.
Thank you for that. And then where do you fit in the grammar skills, comma usage, things like that? Is that sprinkled into these writing skills?
Yes. So the way we're handling it right now is we've taken, so if you think about the reading rope that Dr. Gottman shared, we're taking the word parts and the syntax, and that is all living in the writing side. So all of the grammar instruction, there will be a good marriage between like explicit grammar instruction and then grammar in text. So like now this is how it fits into your writing. And then the reading side is covering more of like the morphology and vocabulary.
All right, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bowen. Questions? Ms. Ford?
Just a comment. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation, but also thank you for sharing the Scarborough's reading rope. Anytime there's an opportunity to really get in depth into breaking down how we learn and concepts, I always think that that's exciting for our students. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ford. Additional questions? All right, well, I warned you, I'm going to ask the same two questions I did with Beth. So again, these are changes. How are we going to assess success? What are the key metrics?
Yeah, so I think that several levels. So as a state, we are responsible for preparing our students for state testing. So I would say at a very like high level, we want to make sure that our students are performing well on standardized tests. But standardized tests are lagging indicators, and they're also, some kids are just not great standardized test takers. So we can't wait for those assessments. So in addition to those assessments, we also have our screening assessments, which are given 3 times a year. And those are really the assessments that we give to sort of give a cast a wide net and find out who's struggling and who might need enrichment or who might need to be stretched. And then at a more base level, we have common assessments that are built into all of our instruction and built into all of our units. And those are very frequent checkpoints. In some cases, as frequent as every week. Teachers are giving sort of a touch point to figure out, like, I just taught this skill, we practiced the skill, you had opportunities to engage with it in different contexts, and now can you perform this skill? And those common assessments are actually going to be the basis of a lot of our teacher work throughout the year, as described by Dr. Thatcher. So reviewing those assessments with colleagues, discussing what they might look like, what changes might need to be made, who was successful, what did you do that made you successful? And then that ultimately impacts how we might need to adjust pacing or resources for the future.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question, again, is how do you integrate or capture the special ed viewpoint?
Absolutely. So similar to what Dr. Thatcher shared, we have special education teachers that sit on all of our committees. So they are there to provide the special education lens into, like, this is how this might work for this type of learner. Here's a possible accommodation that might need to be put into place, so that our core content can be accessible to all learners that are included in our classes.
All right, thank you for those answers. Any other, Ms. Klotz?
Just a comment overall, actually. I would like to say thank you to the entire team who's working on these, has worked on these presentations, on the level of engagement, enthusiasm, and passion that you have. I think that everything evidenced here tonight bodes very well for our students. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Klotz. Anything else? All right, again, on behalf of the board, thank you very much for the presentation. I look forward to considering it at a future meeting. Okay, next item on the agenda are policies. We do have a set of new policies and updates of current policies, first reading. I'd like to ask the administration to come up and provide us an overview. Dr. Povolitis.
All right, hello everyone. So this evening, if it's okay, I'm just going to break the policies into two categories. The first category is the AI policy, which is new policy, and then the second category kind of lumps a lot of safety and security policies together. So if it's okay, I'll start with the first one, policy 815.1, the use of generative artificial intelligence in education. The generative AI technology, as we all know, I think has really progressed in the last few years. A lot is changing. There are no state or federal statutes specifically requiring the adoption of board policy, but schools right now are moving forward with integrating some level of policy for various reasons, of course, so that we can have the best opportunities for all of our students and prepare them for the future, while also making sure we're putting some guidelines in place. So this draft policy essentially was created to address governance regarding the expectations for proper management and responsible use of Gen AI in the educational environment. So that's what I have for 815.1, and I have not received any questions.
Okay. Dr. Jankowski.
So I very much appreciate the fact that we're putting policy in place for this, because as you state, Gen AI in general is the future. And it can be very useful and also very dangerous at the same time. Was this policy based on the PSBA template, or so this is?
It was based on a PSBA template, and then our team met several times to kind of fill in kind of gaps that were kind of optional areas and what we felt best for our organization.
All right, good. I mean, I think it's well done. I think it at this stage captures the points that and areas of concern. Obviously, this is going to be an evolving policy, I imagine, as AI develops even further. But I think it's very important. So thank you for getting ahead of this.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jankowski. Mr. Smith?
Yeah, and speaking of getting out ahead of this, it seems like with this particular topic, it got to kids first, and then we're playing catch up a little bit, and it's not just us; it's everywhere. And we're trying to figure out like how can we leverage this in the classroom, and this isn't anything specific to the policy necessarily, but I appreciate that we're putting, like Mr. Jankowski said, this level of focus in building a policy on it. But as I read through the policy, it talked a lot of, all of it was talking about students and staff and impacts to the school community and the classroom and things like that. But I think there's an opportunity here, not necessarily part of the policy, but an opportunity here to try and continue that catch-up process and working with our families at home, because I specifically, I didn't have a whole lot of time to help my kid with homework. I pull out my phone and boom, I can figure out all the steps that I learned 30 years ago to solve that high level question, and have to go back and spend hours and hours and hours pouring back over the text to be able to figure out the way in which I need to help them get to the answer. To have that kind of a tool in your hand to get it in 5 seconds is really important from a family standpoint who want to support their kids. It's not just math. If if they haven't read that text, or if they aren't sure how to go about analyzing a fiction piece with a nonfiction piece. We just heard a fantastic presentation from our ELA folks. Doing those kinds of things exactly in the classroom, if we can turn our focus on AI in the classroom to also remember our families at home as well, who are probably not aware of even the surface level types of tools available that our kids are going to be exposed to and using in the classroom productively. If we can work at the family level too, that'd be fantastic.
I appreciate that feedback, and we're kind of in the works of creating, of course, professional development. We've already had professional development for teachers, continuing that in addition to putting resources on the website and working with families as well as our students. So kind of all in the works. As we started working through this policy, we've continued to make progress there. So thank you for that feedback.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any other comments on?
I was thinking along the same lines with the AI, as the parents, we're always going to the kids for help. And so, I know we've done a lot of in-services for parents on all kinds of topics, mental health, so on and so forth. AI might be one of those topics that would also be very beneficial.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Other comments on this? I guess I was going to ask, did we verify that ChatGPT was not used to write this policy? Okay.
I was waiting for someone to yes, thank you.
It was not.
Okay. Anyway, I do want to echo the comments of my colleagues. I do think that this is an appropriate time to bring something into our policies in order to provide some framework for how we're going to implement it in the district. So with that, we can move on, I guess, to part 2.
Okay, so part 2, there's 10 policies here, but with Act 33, there's several amendments that are in place. And really, I know it's a lot of policies, but there's just minor updates to a few words. There's one policy that's only citations that were changed in the policy, and a few words really become shifts with the Pennsylvania Department of Education and Department of Safe Schools, and some just shifts with going to PCCD. But as far as our practice, there is really no change in our practice for any of these policies. So I just wanted to give that kind of just general overview as to why we packed 10 in here.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, I think the changes on those are pretty straightforward. If there is nothing further, we look forward to second reading at the next meeting.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is going to be an amendment or an amended 2024 school board meeting schedule. We discovered recently that we had scheduled the reorganization meeting on Monday, December 2nd, which actually is a day that the district is closed, so we're going to move that day to Tuesday, December 3rd. May I have a motion to approve that change?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Ms. Klotz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Falegi,
Aye.
Ms. Ford,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Under other items, we have a couple, we had some additions to the district social media account, specifically approving the Albertus Elementary School and McCountry Elementary School Instagram social media accounts. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Allen, please call the roll.
Ms. Klotz,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Bowman,
Aye.
Mr. Falegi,
Aye.
Ms. Ford,
Aye.
Mr. Jankowski,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly, Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. Moving on to announcements, we had an executive session this evening, the two topics, negotiations and personnel. We have a regular board meeting scheduled in 2 weeks, Monday, August 26th at 7:30 p.m. in the boardroom. With no further business before the board, I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening.